Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. For the 7th episode of the show, we're going to be reviewing Lawrence of Arabia, as well as the most recent Disney remake of The Beauty and the Beast. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us this week is Groupthink Productions executive producer Darrin.
Glad to be here.
How's it going?
It's going good.
It's going all right.
It's all right.
So, this is kind of your movie to discuss, Lawrence of Arabia. You've been kind of referencing this film since I was a little kid, so.
It's one of the films that I definitely adore very much. Clearly, it's one of the greatest films of all time. And certainly this film is part of just this amazing sequence from the director David Lean of just these epic motion pictures, starting in the mid-1950s, going through this, and then finishing up with Dr. Zhivago. But it was one of the very first films, VHS films I bought, much like you have here with Godfather, that it came with 2 VHS tapes. Widescreen with 2 VHS tapes. And so one of the is doing part of the research for getting ready for this event and thinking about the motion picture, I found out that when it was released, it was considered to be the longest commercial release ever. And the reason how they knew that, they did that by feet. How many feet of film was part of the production. It was longer than Gone with the Wind. So it was literally, so we think about the longest, somebody actually measured it, and it was the longest. And it was part of the tradition when you get into it, and if you watch it on DVD, I'm sure that it has this, that when it opens in black. And all you hear is the music, the overture. And it was very much a tradition at the time. They did the same thing with Ben-Hur. They used the Les Overture. And so you would hear just the music with no visual for many, many minutes at a time. And they would do the same thing at the intermission, which was a thing back in the day. You'd actually have the intermission between, and the way they worked it out with the VHS is the first half of the film ends with the fade to intermission, and coming out in the second VHS tape, it comes out with coming out of the intermission and into the second half of the feature.
I haven't seen a person rag up an outdated video format since I saw that video where Leonard Nimoy talks to a rock about how great laser discs are. But yes,
well, there you go.
David Lean's masterpiece. This was coming out of the 70mm roadshow era of the 1960s, I think.
Right.
Where I don't know like how the roadshows would actually play out, but I think they would actually like take these giant like projectors on the road and like display them like just on in specialty screenings, because it was a huge deal to have these shoot on 70mm.
Right. And this is a line that I've used many times, and you've adapted it as well. And quite frankly, I stole it from this fellow that used to have the show on USA Network called Up All Night. And they were doing that week, they were showing the old Mel Gibson movie, Beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max. And there was a scene in the desert, and so the host of the show made the comment that nobody could shoot a desert like David Lean. And I thought it was just wonderful, and I know you've used it before as well, and you just didn't know where it came from. And the point of it is that he takes what is really a very static and antiseptic, there's no life, there's what's going on here, but he makes it interesting. And so we haven't talked about the plot yet, but here are the basics. Lawrence of Arabia, he's an English guy. He fights the Turkish.
Well, yeah.
And so those are the basic, and it takes almost 3 hours to go through, actually, the Ottomans.
That wouldn't be my elevator pitch, but
no.
I think the best way to describe it is that this is an exploration of the Ottoman campaign of the First World War.
Right.
So guy's the guy's been spending all of his time in Egypt because Britain their attention is very much engrossed in France right now. They don't have time to send an expeditionary force out to the middle of the desert to fight the Ottoman Empire, despite the fact that they're supporting the Germans, and they have a rail line that's running all the way from Baghdad to Berlin that's providing them oil. And they see there's obviously a strategic advantage in getting people out. I don't know if how much they discuss this in the film, but I was watching a little bit of history buffs, and they were talking about this. And obviously there is a strategic advantage of sending people out into the desert to fight the Ottomans, but their empire is enormous. They have a huge stranglehold over the Middle East, and there's really no way you can meaningfully send an expeditionary force without splitting British resources. So they send one guy who happens to be in Egypt doing like map making work into the desert as a spy, and he ends up basically leading this enormous like Arabian Revolution against the Ottomans, single-handedly taking back a majority of Syria in the process.
Exactly. So the story itself is extraordinary because the one man was able, and quite frankly, you really don't learn a lot about him through the film, but you know that he is well-educated. But what you don't know is that prior to World War I, he had spent a great deal of time in the Middle East. He had known the area, and that's the reason why he was so important. That's the reason why he was stationed there, because he had that knowledge. And what's even more extraordinary, what they don't do is describe how time and time again he literally would, with his group of Bedouin guerrillas, run circles around the Ottoman forces, and they had no idea where he was, and he was able to do amazing feat after amazing feat, and like you said, leading the guerrilla forces in such a way that it put a stranglehold on the Ottoman possessions there in Arabia, and it was an important part of helping force the Ottomans back, and ultimately, you know, thinking about the Mideast, the British were there to protect the Suez Canal. Okay, well, they pushed away from the Suez Canal into Palestine, and ultimately the war ended, and that's where we got the end of the film. So,
I remember you always used to talk this up back during when the wars in the Middle East were starting. Is like, has no one in the White House watched Lawrence of Arabia? Because this is like a really good exploration of like how everything in the Middle East has basically been destroyed over the past century, just because everything that happening right now in the Middle East is kind of the unintended series of consequences from all the things that happened as a result of the First World War, where in the immediate aftermath of the war, the tribes that had been trying to basically win their independence in Arabia, they started having problems internally, and then subsequently the British and the French decided they were going to start carving it up based on their economic interests. So but the lines, they were pretty arbitrarily drawn, all things considered.
Yes.
And what ended up happening is you had large amounts of tribes that did not get along, who were now officially considered a country. And post-World War II, all the European nations pulled out, and it just became a consistent mess. But a lot of that has to do with and we see a lot of the politics for why that's happening play out in the second half of the film, because a lot of it just comes down to Lawrence has to spend time with the British diplomats, and they don't care.
Right, they're thinking about the colonial interests following a successful completion of the war. But the reason why I always mentioned that line was, didn't anybody watch this? Because Lawrence specifically talks about how the Bedouin tribes are known for their capacity for fighting in fighting guerrilla warfare. Okay, this is their history, this is their tradition. Do we not figure out how they're going to continue to fight if their nation states, our armies are defeated? But again, that's not important right now.
Let's go deeper into this. So Bush,
no, let's not. But,
this is not the right forum.
Right, but with Lawrence, I mean, it's David Lean even in the 1950s and 1960s saying, well, this is how the Mideast got screwed up, because just a few years before, France and England were involved in the Suez affair with Egypt, and that didn't particularly turn out well. The United States was kind of pitted against both of those, as well as trying to do that. And so those are, looking back 50 years, this is how we screwed things up. And now projecting in the future, we can see even more of what's
It's like prophetic.
Right. But going back to the film itself, it is, you have Peter O'Toole, who is really making his breakout breakout appearance. And
Yes.
so we know Peter O'Toole today because of his role as Lawrence.
We don't know him from his appearance in Supergirl.
Right. And because of that film, he had his career. And because of David Lean, you have to have Alec Guinness in it. And in this film, it's almost a little bit comic thinking back on it that Alec Guinness plays Prince Faisal with a lot of makeup.
That would not fly today.
No.
It would so not fly today.
But because of this film, we're also introduced to Omar Sharif, who was apparently, prior to this film, was an amazing Egyptian actor and was well known in the local Egyptian and Middle East cinema and the like, was brought in by David Lean specifically
you
for
were
this
saying
role.
earlier that he was
And
he
then-
was Russian in Dr. Zhivago.
Yes, and
so
so-
I was saying is like, well, I guess David Lean's at least an equal opportunity miscaster. He's not malicious about it.
Right, and so then he turns around and turns Omar Sharif into Dr. Zhivago when that film comes out a few years later. But you can see the one thing that ties Bridge over River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, and Zhivago, all David Lean epics, was Alec Guinness.
Yes.
And the amazing part that he had a much smaller part in Zhivago, but very significant. But in terms of this film, really tying it together, that he is just such an amazing actor, and he dominates every scene that he's in.
Very much so. That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us for the next segment where we'll be talking about the recent Disney adaptation of Beauty and the Beast. Stay tuned.
Does this help at all?
Anything helps, ma'am. Just try to get some sleep now.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, me neither. I'm on my way.
Joining us for this segment is artist, graphic designer, Beauty and the Beast fan, and close friend for the better part of 14 years, Miss Rhiannon Jones. Thanks for having on the show.
Thank you.
So, you were very excited for this remake of Beauty and the Beast.
Oh yeah, everyone has like their favorite Disney movie, and Beauty and the Beast was pretty much mine. So.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
Didn't you buy like a whole one of the Hot Topic dresses for that, or?
Oh, I'm like wearing Hot Topic stuff right now. Yeah, they released like that in Target. They released a bunch of Beauty and the Beast merch, and I was just all over it, throwing my money left and right.
Shut up and take my money.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew that was a huge deal. Like I was watching you like the whole time. It's just like
Yes, yeah.
thing that's happening.
I get to see it again.
So the obvious discussion that kind of comes out of this is, how does the new one work as a translation of the old one? So for me personally, like, I agree. Beauty and the Beast is probably like, if not the best, one of the best Disney films. Mm-hmm. Like just as a beginning, middle, end story, as a musical, as a love story, as everything that Disney tries to be. I think it's one of the best ones they've done. Mm-hmm. And Disney's been doing these live action adaptations since I think Maleficent. I think that was their first one like a couple of years ago. And they've been doing like one or two of these a year. So then Pete's Dragon, Jungle Book, Cinderella, and just this is the newest one they did. Mm-hmm. I think the next one is Lion King. But
yeah,
I'm not
they're
sure.
introducing like a ton of new live action, like, I don't know, like this insane number. Like Mulan, I know, is in the making right now.
How many movies do we own? Let's see.
Let's just make live actions for all of them.
Well, yeah, because like we can't milk the old ones forever.
Yeah.
So we're just making it again.
Exactly.
Obviously. Mm-hmm. And my experience with this has always been that, like, up until now, they've been doing like either revisionist takes like Maleficent,
right,
or they did the like complete overhauls, because Pete's Dragon is cute, but no one's really fondly remembering Pete's Dragon outside of like this bizarre little musical.
Yeah, when I saw it, I'm like, that. Oh yeah, that's a thing.
It's like
it wasn't like a really exciting moment. It was just like, oh yeah, Pete's Dragon existed at one point.
It's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit without all the good storytelling.
Exactly.
And interesting stuff happening in it. But yeah, so they did that. That adaptation was actually really great. Yeah. So for this one, I was very skeptical going into it. Like, I assumed this is going to be a good movie, and it's a decent movie. But how does it work for you as just a straight adaptation of that? Because they don't change all that much.
Yeah, it's a pretty good, like, if you're in for the nostalgia trip, then this Beauty and the Beast adaptation is pretty good for you because it's pretty much the exact same thing, although I do appreciate that they included some new stuff. There's some new songs. There's
just put it directly in my veins!
Yep, exactly. I have probably watched the original a fair amount of times where I know most of it by heart now. So I was just going in there like, all right, let's see how much of this I can quote directly. But as its own separate adaptation, I feel it does well if you don't compare it to the original. Because the original, obviously, like you said, is probably one of the best Disney films out there. It took 4 years to make. There was a ton of planning involved.
4 years?
Yeah, 4 years.
Wow.
So much like animation stuff going on. The Beast was really planned out, things like that. So on the live action one was pretty good for the most part. There were a couple parts I felt were rushed in a sense, but all in all, it was an interesting take on the original.
I know you were saying a while back that something you liked about it was the fact that it highlights a few different parts of the original movie in different ways.
Mm-hmm. They also do some really good, like, they kind of fill in some gaps that the other movie could not. Like, why is there a castle right next to this village and none of the villagers knew about this until now? So they ended up, obviously, in the live action one, they're like, oh, well, the villagers knew about this because he was their prince, but then they forgot because of the spell. So now all these people are just like alone, and you've got Mr. or Mrs. Potts's husband that is like, I keep forgetting, and he doesn't know that his child and his wife exist.
Oops.
And yep, oops. So they definitely do kind of highlight a few things more. They build up Beast and Belle in a different way. Honestly, in the original movie, it's a bit rushed in a few parts. Like they do music montages.
Well, yeah, they do it in a music montage.
Yeah.
Where it's Beast saves Belle from the wolves.
Mm-hmm.
They're still kind of adversaries, and then at the end of Something Sweet, they're basically on dating terms.
Yeah, he gave her a library. That's a pretty good way to get to her.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a decent summary of their relationship progress.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I don't necessarily. I'm not exactly a huge fan of what they did with the Beast in this version of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because obviously you have to do CGI. Because
right.
if you just had a guy in a giant dopey costume,
right.
it looked like the one from the 1950s.
Yeah, there's never been like a solid version of what the Beast looks like in any of the live adaptation stuff.
Well, the animated adaptation works perfectly.
Oh, exactly.
What he is kind of changes depending on what's going on in the moment. So
and the original Beast was very thought through. The animators went to zoos constantly. They were making so many different versions of what the Beast looks like. So unfortunately, in my perspective, in the live adaptation, he looks cool.
It's as good as you're gonna get.
It's as good as you're gonna get. Yes.
I don't know if I necessarily like the character because he doesn't change all that much unlike the first one.
Yeah, he's still kind of a jerk.
Well, he's still a jerk.
Yeah.
But one of the points the movie makes in the animated adaptation is that basically every aspect of him changes from the beginning to the end. So he starts out as an animal that eats sloppily. He can't read, and then by the end of it, he's literate. He can eat properly.
He's got a shy nature to him.
It's a character arc. Belle doesn't need to change because she's already a good person, but her arc is about her seeing what's in him and learning to see the beauty that's inside him, as opposed to Gaston, he's pretty on the outside, but he's
still a jerk. He's always a jerk.
And a murderer, and he does awful things.
And he wants her as a trophy. It's really creepy. Yeah, and then in the live adaptation, they go more in depth about this guy's family, which I appreciate, because you're where the heck is this guy's parents?
Yeah.
what made him a jerk?
Well, I think about the library thing. That's a good example.
Right.
In this version, he can read to begin with.
Exactly. So
instead of him actually having to learn and develop with Belle, it's more so just about revealing who he is to Belle, and that doesn't quite work from developing his character.
Right. They do bond over the books at least, but I do feel they took away, because there's in the original, there's this crucial moment of building between these two where like she's teaching him how to read and how to love books like she does.
Yeah, exactly.
And it helps him become like this better person.
That's how the montage works.
Exactly.
If you have to sum up that much of a relationship, then you need to see the vital points.
Right.
And they when you cut out 2 or 3 of the pegs in that, it just kind of messes with the film.
Exactly.
I guess my only other real problem with the film is that they're trying so hard to kind of replicate the original.
Exactly.
Well, not that you shouldn't replicate it, but
right.
They're trying to do a shot-for-shot remake in a different medium. In animation, you can do whatever you want,
right.
but in this, it ends up like the Great White Somewhere song in the beginning. Emma Watson I think she's a very good Belle, but she's not, I don't think she's a trained vocalist.
No, she's not.
So
you can hear the,
you can hear the auto-tune.
Yeah, the auto-tune. It was really obvious that first part, like when I was in theater watching it and she started singing, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and on top of that, you can tell it's green screened. And
yeah. So
I guess that's my fundamental problem with the film overall, is that the story kind of gets kicked in a few places,
right.
just because they're trying to do a 2017 version of Beauty and the Beast. So that means some of the things that you could fly in the 90s, like they kind of had to smooth them over, and that ends up kind of just messing with it a little bit. But yeah, other than that, it's just the problem with having to do a shot-for-shot remake in a different medium.
They did I can't tell if they were trying to make a complete remake or if they were also including new things, but I do agree that it would have probably, they did both.
That's kind of worse though, because then now you're doing the exact same thing and you're adding stuff into the stew. It's like, man, that's a lovely chicken noodle soup. Why don't I add some Cheetos?
I'm hoping like Disney doesn't try that again. Like maybe try and experiment more in making different takes. Like an entire new adaptation of Beauty and the Beast would have been very interesting, a modern take or something.
What they need to do is pick the films that people don't watch anymore or people don't like and adapt them. Like, let's do a Black Cauldron remake. Let's do a Sword in the Stone remake. Let's do a Robin Hood remake. Oh, wow, having the same team that did Jungle Book do a Robin Hood live action.
Right.
Wow,
that'd be interesting.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Robin Hood's not even a bad film, but that'd be really challenging. It's interesting. It's different. And when you're doing something that's perfect, it's like a carbon copy.
If you're taking a perfect movie that obviously had a ton of work gone into it, and you're trying to remake it in the exact same way, but with live action details, there's going to be some flaws in there.
It's like those papers like the carbon copy paper. You sign your name on it, and you pull it off. You got the second one. It's exactly the same, but it's tinted a different color. So.
Yeah, we included a couple little things here and there, so at least it's like, oh, all right.
Did you like the new songs?
I really enjoyed Evermore. That was an interesting song. I don't feel like in the original Beast sang a lot, and that's because partially Robbie Benson cannot sing in his voice. He's this perfect Prince Charming voice and perfect Beast voice, can't sing at all.
He was fine in Something More.
That was a completely different singer.
What?
Yeah, a completely different singer ended up doing his vocals, I believe.
Wow,
so Dan Stevens ended up doing his own.
That's kind of like seeing how the hot dog is made.
Exactly. The more you know.
No, you're ruining it for me.
I'm ruining it. I'm sorry. So Evermore was a really interesting, because in the play adaptation they have another song that the Beast sings in regards to Belle leaving. So it's interesting hearing more about how he feels when she leaves, because in this one he's just like, oh yeah, I let her go.
I'm sad.
I'm upset. I'm sad. I liked her. She was cute.
All right, that's all the time we have to discuss Beauty and the Beast. Join us in the next segment where Rhiannon's going to give us our movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned.
Good coffee, huh? Oh my God! What are you doing in my apartment?
Hello and welcome to our final segment. Now we hand things over to Rhiannon to talk about her movie recommendation.
So my movie recommendation is a movie called Suspiria. It's a horror, but it's also got some very interesting fairy tale vibes. It's basically about this girl from America who ends up moving to Germany to join a dance academy. But there's a lot of really sketchy things going on with this dance academy that's directly related with witches in a sense. So it's about this girl trying to figure out these mysteries and trying to stay away from getting killed, basically. So
I never heard of this. It sounds kind of vaguely Black Swan-esque.
in a sense, I would also compare it sort of to like Pan's Labyrinth, but not really. It's very colorful. It's got a lot of like Alice in Wonderland vibes in a sense as well, but like way more intense than that.
That's interesting. As I said, I have not heard of this, but
It's very good. I would definitely, you should watch it. Totally.
all right. Do you have anything else to say about it? Or?
It's a very interesting way they went about this movie. The Dance Academy is very colorful. A lot of their choices in colors during most of the film are very interesting as well compared to other horror movies, basically.
I always dig when they do color coding like that. Like,
Yeah, it's very vibrant reds. The Dance Academy itself is very interesting. It's got like a gothic feel, but it's very colorful, like pink, blues, things like that.
How old is this film?
I believe 70s or 80s.
Okay.
I'm gonna
like,
get.
I would have thought it was a newer film, but
No.
that's interesting.
I don't think they're making a remake. I hope they don't. I don't want to see a remake of that. It's
From the
good
director
as
of
is.
Gem and the Holograms.
So it's very interesting, and it actually also probably has one of the most gruesome horror movie deaths I've ever seen.
Oh, no.
It's intense.
I'm
so
already sold.
yeah, cool. Yeah, do it.
It's like it's a subtle, quiet horror movie, and when and there's a really gruesome death. Go on.
Yeah, go on. Very. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. I ended up doing a couple papers on it as well, and how it's directly correlated with fairy tales in a sense. So I always enjoy like movies that try and put that little whimsical aspect to it, but at the same time it's freaking terrifying. So.
Well, that does sound like an interesting film. That's all the time we have for this episode of the Fox Valley Film Critics. You can follow me on Twitter at AntisocialCriti. That's critic without the C at the end. You can find more of our written reviews at the antisocialcritic.tumblr.com. And you can find our backlog of episodes at the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.